Hello everyone, and thank you for listening to this presentation. My name is Pauline van der Straten Waillet. I'm a speech-language therapist in Belgium, and I'm currently conducting research for my PhD, which focuses on professional practices with multilingual children. Today, I'm thrilled to transport you to Belgium and present the results of our research about how SLTs, or speech-language therapists, support the parents of deaf and hard of hearing children from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. For those who don't know anything about Belgium, Belgium is a very small European country with very good beers, amazing French fries, beautiful cities, and a rather unique linguistic situation. Belgium has 3 official languages, Dutch, French, and a bit of German, but Brussels, the capital of Belgium, is also the center of the European Union. This makes Brussels extremely culturally and linguistically diverse. It has the nickname, the capital of 104 languages. 104 languages. This means that this cultural and linguistic diversity is an inescapable reality in the daily lives of professionals working with families in the early childhood sector. However, Brussels is not unique in this regard. High levels of diversity are a reality in many other cities through the world. As professionals, this diversity makes it difficult to offer appropriate and effective services to families from so many diverse backgrounds. It is even more challenging when language and communication are at the very core of our work as SLTs. Now let's take some time to understand the challenges of early intervention with deaf and hard of hearing children, of early intervention with families from diverse backgrounds, so we can fully appreciate the challenges in providing services to families of culturally and linguistically diverse children who are deaf and hard of hearing. Hearing loss means that a child does not hear spoken language well. This makes it difficult for the child to develop skills in spoken language comprehension and expression, and later to acquire skills in reading and writing. This lack of access to language is why deaf and hard of hearing children are at risk for long-term language difficulties. Earlier access to hearing aids and to intervention services are correlated with better outcomes in the child's language development. Another critical factor is family involvement. Involving families in early intervention optimizes the outcomes for the children and their families. Best practice considered to be the use of a family-centered early intervention approach. In this approach, the SLTs work with young children directly, but importantly, they support parents in developing skills to support their children. Parents are trained to use communication strategies to support their child's language development. For example, parents learn to follow the child's focus, to address the child with a rich language model, to recast and expand the language that the child is using, usually in play-based situations. Parent training programs are varied, but they all have one thing in common. Their goal is to increase the opportunities for the child to receive and respond to appropriate language input in meaningful social interactions. Such approaches have been found to be effective when used with deaf and hard of hearing toddlers and with young children with language disorders. These approaches are evidence-based, but some authors caution that parent training programs can contain implicit cultural bias because the dominant knowledge about child development and intervention approaches comes from North American and European populations. SLTs know that they need to involve every parent in early intervention. Moreover, the International Expert Panel for Multilingual Children's Speech recommends that SLTs develop partnerships with families and communities to promote supportive, communicative environment for children. Yet, SLTs around the world report that they have insufficient skills and resources to offer services to multilingual children by working with families from diverse backgrounds, and specifically by working with deaf and hard of hearing children who are multilingual. From these observations was so a significant clinical problem that warranted investigation. We wanted to know, in a multilingual and multicultural city like Brussels, what are the practices of SLTs in supporting the parents of deaf and hard of hearing children from diverse backgrounds? Do they have sufficient skills and resources? If SLTs have developed good practices in working with this population, what are they? Where difficulties exist, what are the unmet needs, and what actions are needed to respond to these needs? In this study, we aimed to listen to the voices of SLTs about their practices and needs, to listen to the families' voices in their description of their experience, and to create evidence-based resources in response to these perspectives that would lead to better support for the children and the families. We conducted an online survey for SLTs working in Brussels with deaf and hard of hearing children. We measured their feeling of self-efficacy, their feeling of mastery of knowledge, attitudes, and tools, and we looked at how they communicate with families. We then conducted semi-structured interviews with two groups. Firstly, with parents of deaf and hard of hearing children from diverse backgrounds living in Belgium, and secondly, with SLTs from diverse backgrounds working in Belgium or abroad. What did we find? SLTs felt significantly less effective in supporting families from diverse backgrounds compared to families in general. And as you can see on this graph, almost all SLTs had a relatively high degree of self-efficacy in supporting families in general, but variability is much greater when SLTs consider supporting families from diverse backgrounds. 2/3 of the SLTs said that they had a relatively good mastery of knowledge and attitudes to work with these families, but consideration of tools and strategies elicited the opposite response. 2/3 of the SLTs stated that they lacked tools and strategies to support families from diverse backgrounds. A disparity exists in SLTs' communication practices depending on whether or not they share a common language with the families. SLTs always or often gave oral information and advice to families with whom they shared a common language, but they only sometimes or never did it without a common language. To compensate for the language barrier, SLTs used a little more often written or graphic information and advice without a common language. When SLTs and families had a common language, some SLTs reported discussing knowledge and practices about child development with families, but these discussions almost never happened without a common language. This suggests that when SLTs and families do not share a common language, families receive less information and advice. Furthermore, as discussions are difficult without a common language, this suggests that SLT may be less able to tailor their intervention services to each family's unique situation and needs. Based on the thematic analysis of the interviews and the open-ended question in the survey, we identified some key elements. SLTs reported that difficulties in supporting families were dependent on both language status and socio-economic status. While SLTs discussed problems and challenges with supporting families from diverse backgrounds, the parents themselves said that they were very satisfied with the support they had received from the SLTs and felt that SLTs had respected the language and culture of the family. Some parents suggested that the support could have been improved through the use of interpreters and the translation of intervention resources, such as rehabilitation information, communication strategies, advice, etc. To conclude, we started by asking what are the practices of SLTs in supporting the parents of deaf and hard of hearing children from diverse backgrounds in a city like Brussels. We ended with the answer: SLTs felt significantly less effective in supporting families from diverse backgrounds, and they required specific resources for multicultural and multilingual early intervention, resources that were not available to them. The SLTs specifically pointed to difficulties in supporting families with whom they did not share a common language and with families of low socioeconomic status. In their position statement, the International Expert Panel recommends that SLTs generate and share knowledge, resources, and evidence to facilitate an understanding of cultural and linguistic diversity that will support multilingual children's speech acquisition and communicative competence. The findings of our research prompted us to create new resources to meet this need. In line with the recommendation, it was important to us that these new documents were easy for professionals and for families to access, available in a range of languages, and written in plain language, so they could be used with family with low language or literacy skills. These original resources are specifically adapted to the situation of young children from diverse backgrounds and their families, not only deaf and hard of hearing children, but any young child who has speech or language difficulties and is receiving services from SLT. These documents are currently available in 6 languages: Arabic, Dutch, English, French, Polish, and Turkish. They are available in open access with other existing resources on my ALWA Diversity website. To conclude this presentation at the Early Childhood Voices Conference, let's remember that listening to the voices of professionals and to the voices of families makes it possible to identify needs in both groups and develop new solutions. Thank you for your attention.